So our last speaker for today is, in my mind, one of the great thinkers of our time who's finally solved the riddle of the pyramids. And in my mind, I've been to the Great Pyramid many times, read all those books, have a huge library. I've always been fascinated by it. And it wasn't until really I read Chris's book that I thought, okay, finally somebody's got the answers. And that is our next speaker, Christopher Dunn, the author of the Giza Power Plant. So let's have a nice warm welcome for Chris.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jennifer, for always being there at these conferences. I have a wonderful time with the World Explorers Club, Adventures Unlimited, and just recently I have found a new family in Body, Mind, Spirit Journeys, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I'd also like to introduce to this lovely group my family, my wife, Gina, and my son Alex. I've got to give credit where credit is due, that the Giza Power Plant was just a tattered manuscript in my bottom drawer before I married Jean and before I met Jean. And we came together because I mailed it to her. She was living in Boston, up in New England, and I mailed her the manuscript, and she started to go through it. And I think ultimately we decided that in order to really give birth to this baby, we had to get married. So anyway, that's what we did, and until we did, the thoughts, the ideas, you know, they were a hodgepodge of chapters that were crafted, and Jean spent many hours working on the manuscript, fixing my commas, and because I always had too many of them, you know, typical Englishman. But anyway. That's my family in Danville, and of course the family that I recently became very fond of were Body, Mind, Spirit Journey, and they're wonderful people that actually went on the tour. It was an incredible experience for me, and I want to bring this up because we come together from different backgrounds, we come together from different parts of the country. And we come together with different ideas and different philosophies, but there's a common thread that runs through all of us. And one of the things that I noted as the 68 of us threaded our way through ancient Egypt and visited each temple and sampled the energies and the frequencies of each temple, of the pyramids, and then, of course, sampled the music of the Arabic music, the belly dancing, which I love. It drives my wife crazy, but that's another matter. I won't talk about it. But anyway, she needs to go to Egypt, I know. But anyway, as the tour progressed over 13 days, there was an incredible bonding between the people. And ultimately, when we came to my presentation, which was on the Saturday, the last day before we came back to the States. And by the way, I wondered why I was on the last day before we came back to the States. And it really didn't understand it, but I thought, okay, well, Andrea knows what she was doing. And indeed, Andrea did know what she was doing, because by the time it came down to my presentation, most of the background information, most of what I could actually teach or share with the group, they had already experienced. They had experienced the culture, they had experienced the energies of these sites. And so all I was left to do on that final day was to actually tell a story and bring everything together. And that story, to me, has become much richer, much deeper, broader than it was when the Giza Power Plant was published. And it was published in 1998. And it's 6 years later, and even after the book was first on the shelves, people would come to me and say, well, when are you going, what's your next book going to be about? And I don't know. I don't have another buck in me, you know. That was it. I just didn't want anything to do with it. Because I have a day job. I make money doing different things than writing books. And I didn't want to sacrifice, you know, a very good income to sit in a garret and be a thinker and a writer and while my family starves. So, so anyway, I wasn't interested in writing another book. And I didn't know if I ever would. Perhaps after I retire, but just recently, as events unfold, there is another buck in me that's bursting to get out, and there's a larger story that needs to be told. And hopefully, in the next year or so, I'll be able to tell that story. But thank you, thanks. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of it today. And I got to preface, there is a story that I would love to tell you right now, but it's still in the making. It's still unfolding, and basically that story is related to the technology and the ancient Egyptians' technology, the ancient Commission technology. And when I wrote the Giza power plant, the copy editor would come back to me and say, Why do you keep qualifying everything you say with, now this is just speculation and, you know, this needs to be proven out. Just say it one time and then just write it like it was a done deal. So that's basically what I did. And I made that qualifying statement at the beginning of the theory on the Giza power plant and then wrote it like, you know, that these events actually transpired. As it turns out, and I did it tentatively. I mean, when I wrote about it, you know, speculatively and tentatively, with no real firm conviction that, yeah, that's the way it was. But I believe in the next couple of years that I can actually do that. And in fact, I don't have to do it. The other people will do it. In other words, there are several technologies involved with the Giza power plant that will now become the focus of professionals in their particular fields. And I'm talking about seismic mitigation or attenuation technologies, which is basically the coupled oscillator theory, which we will talk about, and also the acoustics. And as we threaded through Egypt, and I was given the opportunity to speak to these 68 wonderful people crammed in a temple and sharing the love, you know, I mean, they're wonderful people. One of the things that I shared with them is that the ancient Egyptian science was based on sound. It was based on acoustics. And they worked with stone in a very sophisticated way, a very efficient way, by the way. And really, the quarrying techniques, the machining of the stone, while it's marvelous, it's incredible, and we're going to look at it, I'm at the point now in my studies where it's become a moot point. Because the technologies that were the objective of cutting these stones and shaping them in the way they shape them and putting them together the way they put them together, those technologies will be proven out, and they will become a matter of record, a matter of scientific and record, and for future physicists and scientists to study and to work with. So that is the most pleasing part of it. I can't give you any details because, you know, I don't want, you know, counting chickens before they hatch, and then sometimes if you talk too much and things don't come to pass, you can be criticized. So basically where I am now, I want to tell a story of, or present with you a vision. And this is a vision, and I'm saying a vision in a I'm not using it literally, but it's the impression that I get when I look at this culture, this pre-dynastic culture. What happened to them? Where did they go? What do they look like? And basically what we are left with is just the skeleton of a civilization. When we go to Egypt, we're looking at the bones or the skeleton of the civilization, the stones that were left behind. But what does the flesh will look like? What is the spirit? What is the spirit? And that is most subtle. And you have to be very, very quiet, and you have to listen for that. And if you do listen, you can actually hear the frequencies of those temples, as people will attest to. Teresa is here. She will attest to the fact that, yes, she heard those frequencies. Christine heard the frequencies. And they're ever present. You can, the whole country from Luxor down to Cairo with the temples and the Nile resonates at particular frequencies. And so the vision I would like to give you is, if you just close your eyes and imagine the perfect environment for you. What is that perfect environment? And we really pay homage to the elders of the American Indians and the Egyptians, the old cultures who passed down the oral tradition, and they have an attunement with nature, with Mother Earth. They feel that connection with Mother Earth, and that is really a vision that, or a state of being that we want to be in that we feel connected, a connection with all that is, with our planet, with everybody on it, and even with other planets in the universe, that we feel that consciousness open up and we have that God consciousness, a connection. And really, when that happens, you don't need a temple, you don't need a priest, because you're already connected. As Stephen was saying earlier, you're already connected with God. And you don't need anybody to describe what the protocol is as far as getting to heaven. So, if you can imagine, though, that state of being could actually be accomplished by left-brain engineers. That's inconceivable, isn't it? That you'd have somebody who is totally, left brain, you've got to do this, this, and this, and through this you're going to achieve this, and then this, and this, and this. But isn't that what happens when you get acoustic engineers design a concert hall? And they design instruments, they work with science, they work with physics and mathematics, and they are very clearly defined formulas and algorithms that go into creating wonderful technologies. But they're all kind of left brain, right? And it's kind of difficult to survive in the left brain when you get so much pleasure over in the right brain. So, but if you don't have the distinction, or if both are open together and you live in both sides at the same time, that is the state of being that I actually envision the ancient Egyptians in, is that they are actually open all the time to the universe, and they achieve it with their technologies. They achieved it with their pyramids and the temples. That their acoustic science and what they designed into their civilization actually created a culture where people were in a state of cosmic consciousness constantly, because right now the energy of the sites is shut down. But there are subtle hints, and it's by examining the sites, the pyramids themselves, that you're able to actually get a feel for what it was like. And sometimes you may even achieve it if you stay too long in that coffer inside the king's chamber, because that could really open you up. And I've got to tell you, when I first started to write the Giza power plant, I poo-pooed all New Age theories about mystical experiences inside the Great Pyramid. Because I thought that, well, I'm just not going to convince anybody of the validity of any theory if I cannot actually prove it. Well, you know, some things really don't have to, you really can't prove, you have to experience. And after several trips to Egypt and several experiences where, you know, I've had odd things happen to me, I've become a believer that these energies that still exist were just the echoes of a civilization, the population of which were master engineers, musicians, and just very enlightened beings. But what happened? Now that's the key, and that is the cataclysm that Stephen was talking about, a cataclysmic event. And because of the nature of the technologies that they were involved with, because what they were doing is they were driving the planet, they were driving the Earth to harmony. They were attenuating the seismic activity or the seismic stresses in the Earth's plates and relieving those energies, taking the energies through the pyramids. But they were doing it in a very holistic way. In other words, if you've been involved in a musical group or a chorus, you know that when you get a group together and you start singing, you can actually, you know, the synergy of a chorus or a musical group can build a tremendous amount of energy. More than the sum total of the individual instruments or voices. So this is a phenomenon called nonlinear acoustics, where you have blending frequencies that actually combine to create more energy. And that's one of the areas of study that is going to be ongoing inside the Great Pyramid next year. But what happens, though, is you have a culture or a science that is drawing energy from the Earth through the pyramids, through the temples, and relieving the stresses in the planet, and actually driving the planet to harmony. Now, what happens there is that the planet is in tune with other planets, such as Vela X, which vibrates at the frequency of an F sharp. Funnily enough, the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber, has the chord, the F sharp. It was discovered in 1995 by Tom Danley. And the human brain, it resonates at around 6 hertz. The frequencies in the King's Chamber resonate between 2 and 9 hertz. So when you have, all things have a particular resonance. And by the nature of the physical material, we have certain vibrations. And those vibrations actually are in harmony with all matter in some form or another. Now, if you throw in a lot of other frequencies, you could actually cancel out some of those frequencies. And so you become fairly dead. Not as vibrant. But if you do have energies that are in harmony with you, then you're upbeat and you do become in harmony with your environment. And so you can actually create a synthetic environment where the human body responds to the frequencies in ways that are very beneficial, such as opening up the brain, you know, affecting the hippocampus in the brain, and really achieving a state of nirvana without having to pass out of the body. And really, in a situation like that, if you have a population who are affected like that, who needs anything else? Because we're all striving for something, right? There seems to be a certain amount of disquiet in everybody, that we're all yearning, we're all striving for something. And so that's kind of the vision that I had, that there was this fantastic civilization. The skeleton exists. A lot was stripped away by the cataclysm. The cataclysm, a asteroid or a piece of a comet or hit the Earth and caused tremendous damage. Tsunamis probably scoured the face of the earth, removing a lot of the civilization that existed at that time. The pyramids, of course, because of their nature, they were tuned to respond to earth energies. And because of the design, they knew that they were working with a closed system. The earth is a closed system, and the energies were a known quantity, but they were designed to maximize the throughput of that energy. So when energy was input from the outside, the pyramids became what you would call runaway vibrators, because they could not release the energy fast enough. They couldn't damp it, they couldn't pass it through fast enough, and so we have what we have in the Great Pyramid, which is evidence of how the pyramid functioned. And it was really, that was where I began, and studying the Peter Tompkins' book, Secret of the Great Pyramids. And it was with that evidence, and I was working, strictly from my left brain, looking at the evidence within the Great Pyramid to determine just exactly what was going on. And the key that got me going, as far as what may have been going on, was what Stephen was referring to earlier, and that was the notes by Petrie, when he noted that the King's Chamber had expanded over an inch, and the ceiling beams were cracked, and there was vitrification of the stone. And then, of course, more evidence followed that. But basically, I set myself a challenge, and it was that all evidence has to be explained. It has to find a logical purpose within the framework of the Giza power plant hypothesis. And if there was any evidence that showed up later, it either had to support the hypothesis, or then the hypothesis would have to be revised or even thrown out. That's the scientific method. You have to follow the evidence. And that's what I did. So what we have with the Great Pyramid is what they call a coupled oscillator. And a coupled oscillator is a device that is attached to a larger vibrating body, but it's tuned to a harmonic or the same frequency as the larger vibrating body. And once the oscillator is set into motion, then it will continue to draw energy from the larger vibrating body as long as that larger vibrating body continues to vibrate. So that was basically the fundamental hypothesis of how these pyramids functioned. They functioned as coupled oscillators. And they still do. And there are still sites in Egypt that respond to the earth energies. You can hear it. You can hear it at Saqqara. Stephen had that one slide up of the temple at Saqqara where you just put your head inside the niche and you can hear that deep rumble, And I think David's mentioned something about it being from the buses in the parking lot, but I don't. I rejected that idea because I went out there one time and in a taxi and I still heard it. Okay, in the Great Pyramid, these were the anomaly. This is what everything in this inside here had to be explained. The descending passage, ascending passage, these are 42 inches square. From the entrance down to the bedrock, you have a passageway that's straight within 20,000ths of an inch. That's the thickness of a thumbnail. That is very, very precise for something like that. And from this point on down to the bedrock, through the bedrock to the subterranean chamber, which is about 200 feet, it is straight within 1/4 of an inch. Now, the significant part of this, and I mean, there could be, there's a long discourse just about the digging of the descending passage, because they claim that when Khufu was born, they started to build the pyramid to be his final resting place. Well, because of the nature of this particular passage, you could only allow one person at the workface at any given time, and then if you are using the tools that Egyptologists say were in the ancient Egyptian toolbox, then it would take more than 28 years for that one person to chisel out all that limestone. So even before they start to build the superstructure, you've already exceeded the life of the pharaoh just in digging the descending passage. And there are a lot of examples of that, particularly with the granite too. We'll talk a little bit about that. I asked why. Everything that I saw in there, I asked why? Why these granite plugs in the ascending passage? And the reason that was given was that, okay, well, they put these granite plugs there so that it would keep tomb robbers from getting to the main chamber. When really, as I say in my book, that the only thing that they achieved was to draw attention to the fact that, hey, we got some granite here, maybe there's something behind it. And indeed, some smart people said, yeah, okay, let's dig around these plugs because it's soft limestone around them. And that's how you actually gain access to the ascending passage today. And then coming up the ascending passage to the Grand Gallery, it opens up 28 feet high, 82 inches wide at the bottom, and 42 inches wide at the top. Horizontal passage to the Queen's Chamber. A lot of anomalies in the Queen's Chamber. Early explorers said that the walls and ceiling were coated with salt up to an inch thick. And the question is why? The lower parts of the pyramid did not have the same incrustations of salt. And these shafts that come into this chamber actually were not connected originally. They were terminated 5 inches short of coming in through to the chamber itself. And it wasn't until 1872 when Wayman Dixon, early explorer, detected a crack in the south face of that chamber, and had somebody chisel out the limestone and discovered the southern shaft. And we've probably all heard about the exploration of the southern shaft in 1993 by Rudolf Gantenbrink. And he sent a robot up this shaft and found that it terminated about 220 feet up above the level of the King's Chamber, which kind of negated the tomb theory, because the tomb theory was, why did we have 3 chambers inside the Great Pyramid? And their discussion on that was brilliant. They said, well, originally Khufu wanted to be buried here, then he changed his mind. So then he had this built, and then he changed his mind again, and then finally his resting place was in this King's Chamber. So then, they determined where this shaft ended, and then the question by, as impudent alternate historians was, well, okay, then, well, if he decided that he wanted to have his resting place here, how come he continued having this shaft built from the Queen's Chamber? And they called them air shafts for some reason. So here we have an air shaft that could not pass any air. Moreover, we've got 2 of them, and similarly, the one on the north side was not open clear to the chamber. And also similarly, it terminated before leaving the Great Pyramid, like these King Chamber shafts. So the questions just began to mount. Why the salt? Why the termination of this shaft? Or why didn't it come through to the chamber? I didn't really buy the argument that, well, they left it there just in case they needed air at a later date. I don't know maybe what they're smoking when they come up with some of those ideas, but they just don't make any sense. And then there was other aspects of this that, the floor was very rough. It had a niche in the wall. What were the reasons for that? And the smell. Early explorers exclaimed that it had a very noisome odor. So what was the smell? Also, exuding from the cracks in the limestone in these shafts was a white substance that was analyzed. It was found to be gypsum. Why gypsum? That's curious, why they would have gypsum oozing out of the shafts there. And we'll get into answer some of those questions, because there are reasonable answers for them. But you have to, stretch your mind and move into areas that Egyptologists really don't want to go into. Then we get into the Grand Gallery. Some very curious features here. There's a corbelled walls along the ramps. Stephen mentioned there were 27 or 28 pair of slots. The slots were cut vertically into the ramps, not perpendicular with the slope. The slope is about 26 degrees and 30 minutes, and quite accurate, by the way. So what was the reason for this Grand Gallery? And then we come to the King's Chamber, the antechamber right here, and the small passageway into the King's Chamber, and then this curious design here. Around this area, what I focused on most, Petrie, as Stephen said, he wrote that the whole chamber had expanded over an inch, and they claimed that it must have been due to an earthquake. Now, remember what I first started to talk about when we talked about the lower part, the descending passage. Okay, we have an earthquake that's moving this chamber over an inch, but it's leaving this passageway still within the thickness of a thumbnail over 150 feet. Now, does that make sense to you? It doesn't to me. No other place in the Great Pyramid do you have such movement. So that was a question. The other question was, of course, these shafts coming in, this is the northern shaft. The dimensions of the northern shaft have special meaning. They're special dimensions, 8.4 by 4.8 inches. And then the southern shaft, directly opposite the northern shaft, has some unusual features that are also very important that we'll talk about too. But the real kicker, in my mind, was these overlying beams above the King's Chamber. And that really puzzled me. They were investigated in the mid-1800s by Colonel Howard Vyse, and they drove upwards using blasting dynamite and discovered all these chambers above the King's Chamber, 5 layers of beams. They weigh up to 70 tons each, and there's over 40 of them. Now, the conventional hypothesis, a theory, is that these are relieving chambers. And, I kind of irrelevant, I can't speak. How do you say familiar? Irreverently, I say, well, considering that you don't find any other bathrooms on the Giza Plateau, maybe that's why it is. So these are what they call relieving chambers, but they were actually, you couldn't really get up there to do much without a very tall ladder. But if you look at the design, they're supposed to relieve the weight of the pyramid on top of this chamber right here so that Khufu could have a flat ceiling. Because not only did he change his mind about being buried in this chamber, but he thought that a flat ceiling would be rather nice instead of this gable ceiling right here. And the really interesting design here is this is what they call a cantilevered design on the ceiling blocks, and that means that there is as much or more stone lying outside the walls as there are inside the walls, so that you have that balance. It's cantilevered, and there's no pressure or arch thrust where they meet in the middle. But getting back to the relieving chambers, as you can see, they are holding up no more than their own weight. The structural integrity is right here, with a similar design to what you would find here. And so my argument in the book is that if they wanted a flat ceiling in the Queen's chamber, they could certainly create one. All they would have to do is add a layer of beams right here, and they would have a flat ceiling, and they won't have to worry about relieving chambers or anything like that. So that was the other thing. Now the other part was the tops of the beams were all rough. They had gouges in them, and the underside and the sides were square and parallel and perfectly flat. There was a reason for that. Also, the other question was, why the granite? They went from limestone to granite. They changed to granite right here. The floor is granite. The walls and all of these beams came from Aswan, which is 500 miles down the Nile, up the Nile. Sorry, I get that mixed up, you know. But anyway, the granite was quarried 500 miles away, weighing up to 70 tons apiece, brought down to the Giza Plateau, and then raised up into the pyramid 200 feet up in the air. At this level right here, we're about 175 feet from the bedrock. So, you know, we're looking at quite a lot of work just to have some beams that are holding up nothing more than their own weight. There was definitely a specific reason for them. And we'll get into some of those reasons. So to summarize, basically, that was the conventional nomenclature, which I changed, and I will summarize thus, that in the so-called Queen's chamber, it was actually a reaction chamber. And they had two solutions coming through the shafts and into this chamber, combining to create hydrogen. The hydrogen interacted with the limestone, and you had the leaching of salts from the limestone. That's why you had salt up to an inch thick here. It also, in this shaft right here, I proposed that there was a dilute hydrochloric acid solution coming in this way, and then zinc chloride solution here. Those are two possible chemicals that, when mixed, would create hydrogen. But the hydrochloric acid solution, its action with the limestone would create gypsum. That's another result of a chemical reaction there. So we explained the salt, we explained the gypsum, and also possibly the noisome odor as described by Smythe when he was in the pyramid in the 1800s. So that's our reaction chamber. We get hydrogen. Why do we want hydrogen? Hydrogen is the signature of the universe. The frequency of hydrogen bombards this planet on a daily basis. It's 21 centimeters, 8.309 inches. 8.309 inches. Oh, let's see. Let's refer back to the northern shaft in the King's Chamber, 8.4 inches. And a waveguide for a hydrogen microwave, the suitable waveguide would be the wavelength. The width would be the wavelength, and then the height approximately a half of the wavelength. So there is another explanation or another solution to why the dimensions. I proposed that the Grand Gallery was a resonator hall, and the reason why there was several events that transpired before I actually theorized that. One was a very excellent CD or LP when I got it. The CDs haven't been invented, but it was by Paul Horn. It was called Inside the Great Pyramids. Anybody hear that LP? Oh, look at all them hands go up. Great, great. Well, anyway, that's a fabulous CD. It really transports you. You really think you're there. And that's why I was banging on the coffin, Mark, while you were laying in there. I hope I didn't disturb your sleep. But anyway, or your trip, whatever you were doing. But anyway, Paul Horn, you know, when he started the CD, is banging on the copper inside the King's Chamber, and he's got that 440. Oh, by the way, should I tell them about 440? All right, let me tell you about 440. This is a really neat story. You'll like this. Then we'll get on with some real stuff. But anyway, when we got to Egypt, well, everybody was tired, you know, and I got my bag, and I went to the room and checked in, opened the window, opened the curtains, and there, right in front of me, is the Great Pyramid. Full frontal north face. Wow, that's great, that's fantastic. Sitting on the patio, looking over at the Great Pyramid. And then I look down, and there's my room key, and it's 440. Ooh, this is really cool. I like this. And then we checked out of the hotel. We came back a week later, and I get my room number, and I go to Andrea, and I said, Andrea, I said, did you do something? Did you persuade them to give me 440 again? No. I was the only person who was actually assigned the same room number when I got back off the cruise. I was in 440 again. Anyway, that's beside the point. But it was a kind of a neat story. I was impressed. Body, mind, spirit journeys. You got to go on. I'm telling you. But so this chamber resonates at 440. Well, Paul Horn, when he made his LP here, he wrote a little booklet, and in the little booklet there was a clue to what's going on in the Grand Gallery. And what he said was that he made his recording, then he went out onto the Great Step, and he played his flute on the Great Step, and he said, oh, he was a little disappointed in the reverberation. It sounded rather flat. But there was a sound coming from somewhere else. And the sound from the flute was going out into the Grand Gallery, bouncing around, and then it was echoing or coming back to him from the King's Chamber. The sound was actually, he could hear more coming from the King's Chamber than he could from the Grand Gallery. And that is the key to the Grand Gallery, is that when we are channeling those earth energies through the pyramids, we need a little more energy to drive these granite beams to resonance than what we can achieve just in this small area. So in the Grand Gallery, we house a bank of resonators. And those resonators take those earth energies and convert those vibrations to airborne sound. And then that sound is focused through this opening and reverberates or drives this complex into a vibrating massive energy. This complex right here is totally freestanding within the Great Pyramid. The walls are freestanding from the core masonry. There's a gap on the outside of these walls. They're freestanding. The floor is freestanding. I'll tell you a little story about the floor. But the floor is freestanding. It's inserted inside the walls so that the walls are not pressing down. Those ancient engineers and scientists, they didn't want any damp spots. They didn't want any dampening. So the walls actually go down on the outside of the floor about 5 inches. But the interesting thing on the floor was when I was there in 1995, and I was doing some acoustic tests. The guards thought I was meditating, but I wasn't in that frame of mind at that time. I wanted to check and see if there was any RF frequencies coming from the granite. So I paid about $100 to stay in the King's Chamber. After all the tourists had gone, I wanted at least a half an hour. And I had a tape recorder with me, I had a tuner with me, a chromatic tuner, and I also had an RF counter. But I wanted the lights off because I wanted to make sure that there was no noise, electrical noise, that would interfere with any true readings that I might have. So I was in there, and I had the tape recorder going, and I was intoning the sound of the chamber, you know, the distinct 440 frequency. Om, great, you know, I was really getting into it. But but anyway, the lights weren't going off. And so finally, I just stomped across the floor, you know, climbed through the passageway, yelled down to the guards, turn off the lights, you know. And then came back into the chamber, and fortunately I got back just in time because they turned the lights off, and there was my flashlight, and then I was able to conduct my tests. One problem I had, though, was that while the lights went off, the fans didn't. They were on a separate circuit, and the fans kept on running, so I was thwarted in that respect. Hopefully this year we can get some purer readings. But back in my room later, I had the tape recorder running, and I also had the chromatic tuner, and the tape recorder had recorded all my chanting. It had recorded every step that I took across the floor. It recorded my yelling down the grand gallery to turn off the lights. And by the way, the separation, I mean, my tape recorder was over here and I was out here. And when I yelled down to turn off the lights, it was almost like I was right next to the tape recorder. It wasn't like there was a separation of thousands of tons of granite and limestone between me and the tape recorder. And there's a reason for that. But the other part of it was that every step I took across the floor, as it was played back, the tuner recorded 440. So it's not just the intoning of the frequency, but even striking the floor with a footstep caused the chamber to ring 440, which is brilliant. It's great. The other part that was really neat was that when you're in the chamber and you are intoning that 440, very strong tone, you don't hear what else is going on. There's other things going on. And the tape recorder actually picked that up. And it was higher frequencies where the power, or the energy, was cascading to higher frequencies within the chamber as I was intoning. And that was played back on the tape recorder. So really we're talking about these master engineers, scientists, acoustic engineers. And nothing they did by chance. Everything was intentional. And so then I began to think about these granite beams above. And I came to the conclusion that those granite beams, they had to have actually tuned them to respond to a particular frequency. And really, just like piano strings, if you strike one and you undampen the strings, another one at a higher octave will resonate. The harmonic of that particular frequency will resonate. It will absorb the energy and respond in sympathy with it. And you can actually transfer energy from this lowest beam clear to the top beam if each of those beams is tuned to the same frequency or a harmonic of that frequency. And that is what I believe is happening. The other part was that when Howard Weise's men went into this opening right here, they found that the whole floor of the top of the beams was covered with this fine black powder. And the fine black powder, they examined it and they determined it to be exuviae, or the cast-off shells and skins of insects. And that was a puzzle to me too. What was the purpose for that? And then it all comes back down to the energy inside that chamber. And the ultimate conclusion that there had to have been an explosion within the chamber that forced the walls out, caused the beams to rise, crash back down, and the energy level was so high that the core masonry and the limestone vibrated, the air was filled with this dust, And actually the elements of the limestone, which are made up of this nummulitic limestone, which is actually seashells and foraminifers, that they may have filled the air, may have actually been scorched and blackened, and then finally deposited on the top of the beams. That's just a possibility. So that's the summary of the Giza power plant, really. That what we have is a source of energy, which is the Earth, coming through the Great Pyramid. We have the hydrogen generation here. We have energy collected here. We have a resonator hall that collects the energy. That energy is directed into this chamber. The energy of that chamber is raised to a much higher level. It affects the hydrogen in that chamber. The hydrogen is pumped to a higher energy state. And then what we have is an input signal coming in. Oops, wrong one. An input signal coming in, collected from the universe. That's the source of your signal, coming in through this shaft into the chamber, and then something happens there. And I made an analogy when we were on the cruise with Body, Mind, Spirit Journey. We did what they call the conga. And I asked the group in my presentation, do you know what stimulated emission is? And everybody's going, oh yeah. It's not a sexual thing, unless you want it to be. But a stimulated emission is a term that is used in a maser or laser. So you have microwave amplification through stimulated emission radiation. That's the acronym. Laser is light amplification through stimulated emission radiation. And then the stimulated emission part is where you have a photon which is emitted after an electron is forced down to its ground state. It releases a little packet of energy. That little packet of energy moves in a particular direction. And it can be entrained with other little packets of energy. And I crafted the analogy of the conga, because basically what you have is a room full of little atoms, and they're all building up this energy because of all this belly dancing that's going on and the music, and everybody's getting pumped up, and then they say, come with me, and they all follow a line, and they all just start dancing around the room, and eventually one joins, and another one joins in, another one joins in, until everybody's releasing all their energy, and they go back to their chairs and start to top up again. But anyway, that is actually a very loose analogy, but it really could work that way, because the photon in a laser or a maser strikes a electron that's at a higher state and drives it down to a lower state, and then that packet of energy that's released is entrained with the direction of the input signal. And it happens billions or trillions of times a second. And it happens so fast that over the width of this chamber, you could have a tremendous buildup of energy. A lot of energy could be entrained with that input signal, and then collected from this chamber and then coming up to the outside. So the F-sharp chord is evident in the King's Chamber. And that is actually, it was detected by Tom Dunley. I think I said 95, but it was 96, I believe, when he did that. And it was detected by him without any external stimulus that he knew of. He had all his equipment turned off. There was nobody else in the pyramid. But the F-sharp chord was detected not in audible frequencies, but in infrasonic, between 2 and 9 hertz. The other interesting thing is is that when I wrote my book, we talked about the Earth's hum. I discussed that a little bit in my book. And it hadn't really, it was just a theoretical discussion because it hadn't really detected the Earth's hum. And in 1998, actually it was published in 98, at the same time as my book, 2 Japanese scientists published a paper that they had actually detected the Earth's hum, and the frequencies were between 2 and 7 hertz. And so basically what we have is a device that's so finely tuned to the planet that it's selectively picking out frequencies from the Earth and drawing them through. I speculated that these were actually Helmholtz resonators. My thinking on that has changed a little bit because the Helmholtz resonator is the King's chamber, and that is actually the Helmholtz resonator. These were resonators, to be sure, but they were not Helmholtz in that they did not hold the energy, build the energy up inside them. They converted the vibration into airborne sound, and then that was directed through into the King's chamber. Oh, there's me. Oh, there's me again. That is Dr. Hawass, my new best friend.
He controls all the pyramids and everything, and he knows all our.
Yeah. Yeah, I met him in 2001 and with Gail Fallon, who was the producer of PAX Television, or Grizzly Adams, and so I used that entree to get into the Serapeum, and it was a very fruitful experience, really. Stephen earlier showed the Grand Gallery, and we're looking now at some of the staining on the. I believe this is the northern face of the Grand Gallery. But along the ceiling in 1999, when we were there, and I think I don't know whether that was when Stephen took his photographs, but they closed the pyramid for cleaning, and of course, you know, the speculation was, the scuttlebutt on the internet was that Hawass was really digging a tunnel over to the southern shaft, Gantenbrink's door, and he wasn't really cleaning. Well, they had cleaned it. It was obvious that they had cleaned it. But here we had these scorch marks so deep into the limestone that they couldn't clean them out. And you can really see that the thermal stress in the limestone. And referring back to what Stephen was saying earlier, when we were there with Ted, Robin Mitchell, and Ivy West in 1999, they flooded the wall of the Grand Gallery with light, and you saw the damage on the walls, and it was at each corbelling on the walls, and following the line right down, it went right down into a slot. So that to me was basically evidence that came in after the fact, after the theory had been proposed, and actually it supported the hypothesis. And really, if the hypothesis had been challenged, that question could have been posed. You know, that okay, well, if your theory is correct, then these conditions should exist in the Grand Gallery. Those questions weren't really posed to me, but the evidence is definitely there. And as you can see, these 2 ceiling beams right here, that's not the limestone that you find in the lower parts of the Grand Gallery. Gantenbrink's door. It was discovered in 1993. Upawat 2 went up the southern shaft and found this blockage. I was with a friend of mine, Jeff Summers, at the time when we saw that documentary, and he commented, well, they look like electrodes. And of course, you know, why couldn't I say that first? Because that, to me, is exactly what it was, exactly what they are or were. And the reason I say that is because if you take everything in total, the fact that at the lower parts of the shaft you have the limestone left, or plate, where the shaft is not connected to the chamber, the question is, okay, how do they feed the chemicals into the chamber? And when I lived in Indiana, I was having a septic system put in, and we had one of the civil engineers out who was doing a percolation test. And I came to him and I said, hey, Roland, what would you do if you were just working with limestone? Could you still do the same percolation test? And he said, yes. He said you would actually measure the time it would take for the water to seep through. And basically the elements that you would need to know in order to be able to determine exactly what that rate was would be the head pressure, what the weight of the column of water is on the exit point. So using that and knowing, and also theorizing that this shaft was full of a chemical feeding into the chamber, it made sense to me that they would need to know at all times what the head pressure was, and in order to know what the head pressure was, they would have to have some kind of a device to signal when the column of chemical had dropped. And so basically what we have is a fluid switch, where when the column drops, then the column of water, the chemical, gets lighter, so the head pressure gets less. In order to maintain the head pressure, you've got to keep the shaft full. I'd also, in the book, I'd written about how the shafts were replenished with this chemical. And these are shafts on the outside, on the east side of the Great Pyramid. There's also shafts on the south side of the Great Pyramid, too. So I had theorized that they had some kind of underground chamber, but when I found out about these shafts, it made sense to me that they would be replenishing the shafts here from the outside rather than an underground chamber. And so we have the southern part right here, and the southern shaft coming out on the south side, and then the northern shaft coming out on the east side. We talked about the southern shaft having a hydrochloric acid solution, a dilute solution in it. We see that the limestone is eroded on this particular part. I'd also, by the way, made a prediction before another exploration of the southern shaft in 2001, was it, or two? 2002, when Fox Television or National Geographic did their exploration with Pyramid Rover. And I posted an article on my website, What Will Be Found Behind Gantenbrink's Door, because for the Giza power plant hypothesis to hold together, they'd had to be predictive, it had to be falsifiable, and evidence that was uncovered had to support it, or we go back to the drawing board, or we just throw it out. And when they did their exploration, we had an intact electrode here on the right. This one, when Gantenbrink sent his robot up, the lower part of this particular electrode was laying on the floor over here, but this one was intact. But you will note that these are eroded down the length of them. And the erosion pattern is a normal erosion pattern if it is like a falling column of acid or acid solution, where the lower parts will be immersed for a longer period of time than the higher parts. And so you would get a taper. The column would drop, and then it would fill again. Then it would drop, but the lower parts would be immersed for a longer period of time, so therefore they would suffer the most erosion. Well, when they went in to do their drilling, they were going to actually drill through this block. They called it a door. I don't know why they call it a door. I think it was a nomenclature that was developed when Gantenbrink went in. They call it Gantenbrink's door. Even Gandenbrink doesn't call it a door, he calls it a USO, which is an unidentified stone object. But this is the pyramid robot. But what they had to do before they drilled was to determine just how long their drill bit had to be. Makes sense, right? Because they needed to know how thick that limestone was so they could determine what size drill to use. So this little device on the end of their robot is an ultrasonic thickness tester. And it has to press up against this limestone block. It has to fully press up against it. There can't be any gaps, any air gaps between, in order for them to get a good reading. And you'll see that we have an intact, almost intact electrode there. And then it's up against the block now. But look, something seems to be missing. Notice that? Obviously, they didn't say anything. They stayed mute on that, but they had to remove the lower portion of this electrode in order for that sensing device to fully connect with the block. Now, the interesting thing, too, is that they determined the block was 3.25 inches thick. And my illustration indicated that it would be about 3.64 inches. What was beyond? They drilled their hole. They went in with an endoscope with a camera. The lighting wasn't that great because they had a fisheye lens because they wanted to look wide. But the fisheye lens had the effect of causing the beam to focus, or the light to focus. So you had the distorted effect, but you had the focusing light in the center of the block. But when you didn't really see much on the when the documentary was run, but I had a high-resolution image captured, and I brought it into my graphics program and lightened it, and we see that there's maybe something going on down at the bottom left here, indications that there may be a downward shaft, and also indications that it was rectangular. Because the feed rate of the chemical is not that great, then the feed shaft to the southern shaft does not have to be that big either. Only 1.5 inches wide by all accounts. So then I revised my hypothesis on, if they fully explore, which I hope they do this year. They've got the University of Singapore, some students working on another robot. Hopefully they will be able to get a clearer look, maybe have an articulating arm that will look around. But basically I have modified my hypothesis somewhat. But the next week after that exploration, something really exciting came up. They explored the northern shaft. But, the clever Yankee ingenuity, when Gantenbrink tried to go up the northern shaft, his robot, it gripped the ceiling and the floor, and he came up to an obstacle where the shaft bends to go around, ostensibly to go around the Grand Gallery. And they had these exploration rods. Somebody had been sticking rods up to see if they can find some treasure in early times, and their rods have become stuck in the bends. Excuse me. Gantenbrink's robot could not get over those rods. Well, these clever iRobot team, they turned their robot 90 degrees, and so instead of gripping the floor and the ceiling, it gripped the walls, and it rolled right over the obstacles and around the bend, and look what we've got. We have more electrodes, except these are different electrodes. The process, the chemical was different in this shaft. What we had was the zinc chloride solution. And what do you get when you pass an electric current through a solution with zinc chloride? You get an electroplating process. And look what we've got here. And the staining on the stone around this electrode right here, this one's fairly clean. This one has got that white patina on it. It's been electroplated, in my humble opinion. I hate people who say humble opinion. Nobody has a humble opinion. Not in this group. Anyway, so that, the promise is there. I mean, the evidence, as it keeps coming in, does not dispel the Giza power plant theory. It actually feeds into it and supports it. Now, let's see. I've got about I got about 4 more hours of slides, and and about 20 minutes to go through them. We talked about machining, and I'll tell you a story. Won't be too long. When Stephen and I, in 1999, he said, "Oh, I saw that block that you wrote about in your book. This is a fantastic block." I said, "Yeah, I know. It was pretty good." He said, "Yeah, we need to go over there." We were over on just walking the Giza Plateau, and he says, let's go over there and take a look at it again, And I said, "Okay, we'll just walk over there." And I started walking this way, and he starts walking the other way. And I'm like, "Stephen, where are you going?" And he says, I'm going to your block. It's down here." "No, it's not. Mine's over here." So he says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." So anyway, this is actually the block that I talked about in my book, and I hadn't even stumbled across the block that Stephen had until he showed it to me. But what I had done is determined that there were clear signs of machining. I mean, they had to have had some kind of precision 3-axis control, at least 3-axis control, to create this block. The contour is regular. The contour is replicated around the block. It has features that are very difficult to produce, and it has features that are quite common, a common manufacturing design today. And basically what I'm talking about is this feature right here, where you have a groove, almost a groove down in near the face here. But this piece of forming wax, and I demonstrated this when we went to the Giza Plateau a couple of weeks ago with the Body, Mind, Spirit journeyers, and showed them again. Took a piece of forming wax, pressed it into the corner, so that I had I had the impression of the radius in this corner right here, and then I showed them around the different parts of the block that the radius was consistent all the way around. Now, what I'm talking about this is like an engineering drawing of that. You have a top view, front view, a section of it. This contour is replicated with precision across the entire length of the block. And using a precision parallel on the top of the block, over 12 inches, it was accurate to within 1,000th of an inch. But I would say overall, because there did seem to be some cracking and some flaws in it, I would say that overall it's probably within 5,000ths of an inch of being true to form. This feature right here is common, and basically what we do here, we only do this if we want to cut the block efficiently, and we want to use a larger tool bit to cut the block with a larger radius, but we have another piece that we want to put on there with a smaller radius to fit in the corner. And when you're working things out to a very, very small radius, it takes exponentially longer period of time to do that. So it's just an efficient way of creating an object mechanically in a practical way. And it's quite common in engineering today. We would look at some of the precision crafted bowls in the Cairo Museum while we were there. Incredibly crafted, very precise, perfectly balanced. That's the schist bowl that Stephen was talking about. Sophisticated lathe work. They cannot create these things using chisels, and the machining marks on them are so clear, so evident. I see them every day. I've lived with them for years. I recognized, and this was a metal artifact that we looked at while we were in the Cairo Museum. And, you know, it's like most people see this and they go, what is that? I took it back. I created a drawing of it because I didn't get a very good photograph, and I created a drawing of its features, and I went to our chief engineer at the company I work for, and I says, hey, Alan, what do you think this is? And he said, well, it looks like a transition duct. And basically a transition duct is a device that they put in an aircraft engine that redirects airflow or takes air or, you know, some kind of a fluid or a liquid from one place to another. Mixes it. You have a hole in this side right here. And it's, you know, it was just an amazing piece, artifact, and it's kind of like, you know, why? Where did it come from? Here we are at Abu Ghraib, the hemispherical blocks that Stephen was talking about, made out of alabaster with the holes in them. And there's a lot of these, and it seems like the Sun Temple was actually surrounded by these. It had them layered around there. And that's the altar that Stephen was looking at, the so-called altar. Yeah, I mean, Stephen was right. This material is very friable. It breaks easily. It cracks easily. You're not going to create something like that by pounding on it with a chisel. It just doesn't work. And then when we look closer at it, we can see, if we look in the corners, we can see that we do have the evidence of tool marks, circular tool marks in these corners. So it's a very interesting artifact. It's massive. There's a massive piece of stone. I mean, just one of those pieces of stone is incredibly huge. But this alabaster, and this is like a, you know, you can see where the sedimentary layers are on the alabaster. And they make beautiful bowls out of alabaster, translucent, beautiful bowls. And so how did they do all this, you know? And, you know, just ask any Egyptologist, except Stephen. He's not a real Egyptologist anyway, but I think I was sold a bill of goods back in '95. But they will tell you, you know, I went to the Cairo Museum in '86, and I said, well, how did they build the pyramids? And he said, well, come here, I'll show you the tools that they use. And so he showed me this case with these copper implements. He said, see, these are the tools that they built the pyramids out of. And I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, no, we won't get there yet. But anyway, they have two cases, about 12 copper chisels, and, you know, with these 12 copper chisels, they created miracles. And I don't think they actually attacked the stone with them. I think they used them as wands. And, you know, it's the only way. I mean, that makes more sense to me. I don't know about you, but it does make more sense to me that they were using them as wands and miraculously creating those blocks. But this Egyptologist, he was very friendly. And I said, well, what about the granite? You know, you can't cut granite using copper chisels. And he said, he says, but you need to go to Aswan and look at the unfinished obelisk. Come, I take you to the travel agency. So he took me over to the travel agency and made sure that I bought 2 tickets to Aswan. I realized later, after learning some of the habits and customs of Egypt, why he had to make sure that he was there taking care of me. And I'm sure he paid a visit to them later, or received something in the mail. But anyway, I went to Aswan. It was very educational. It was great being at the unfinished obelisk. It was great being there again with Stephen. And I was hopefully going to have some photographs of the latest trip, but time got away. Time and sickness got a hold of me. But this was in 1999, and I'm wearing Alan Alford's hat there. And I'm going to have to send it back to him one of these days. But this is inside the so-called box in the so-called sarcophagus, the box in Khafra's pyramid. And in '95, I didn't have a square. I didn't have a precision square. I had a very precise surface gauge, and I noted on the inside of the box just how perfect and how precise the surfaces were. And so I wondered how square the corners were. And here I am, I'm exclaiming bloody hell, because I'm like, whoa, bloody hell. You know, I mean, this is absolutely incredible work. How do they do this? You know, and you don't create that kind of perfection or squareness in a corner just by measuring from corner to corner. I mean, theoretically, if you measure from corner to corner, make sure they're equal, you're supposed to be square. But to create that precision, you cannot do that unless you use instruments that you can measure to within a thousandth of an inch. And then you won't measure to the sharp corner because you won't know how sharp it is. You'd have to have some kind of a gauge to fit on the surfaces that would not take into account the corner. I mean, it's very, very particular work. It's very involved, and people train for years and years to create these kind of artifacts. That's a wax impression of the corner, and the corners are very sharp. And that's another feature of these ancient boxes, is how sharp those corners were. Now, this is a box that you could create with a dolerite pounder, and this is the kind of technology that the Egyptologists claim that the ancient Egyptians had. And so, yeah, you'd be perfectly capable of creating something rough like that with a dolerite pounder. Certainly not what I just showed you. Now, these, for anybody of my particular bent, training, experience in life, this is the coup de grace. This is the smoking gun. It's undeniable. You cannot dispute what we find in the Serapeum. The granite boxes, they're huge granite boxes. They weigh around 70 tons. The lids weigh about 20 tons, and they are precise. Now, we'll get back to, let's talk a little bit about these glyphs. While I was there, I had a distinct pleasure, while I was in Egypt, I had the distinct pleasure of sharing some of my expertise with Soha Mahmoud, the tour guide, or Egyptologist tour guide. And we talked about what distinguishes the ancient glyphs, or those glyphs that are contemporaneous with the manufacturing of the artifact. And Stephen touched on that a little bit earlier. And basically what you're looking at in some of these ancient reliefs is very, very, very sharp corners, deeply gouged reliefs, three-dimensional contours that are smooth, very sharp corner radii, inside corner radii, and something that is three-dimensional actually jumps out at you. And also very, very fine detail work that is similarly very deep, very difficult work to accomplish. And so we talked about what is evidence. And Stephen touched on that earlier. What is the evidence? And the evidence is not necessarily these scratches that could be put on at any time, and even if it's put on at the same time that the box is created. If it tells a different story than what the technology tells you, then it's just hearsay. And basically, it's hearsay evidence. It is, unless you have the person there who is going to testify to the fact that, yes, I was there back in 4500 BC, and I applied those glyphs, and just before that they brought them down, and this fella called Joe finished them off with a copper pounder. Well, I'm being facetious now, but seriously, it was really gratifying to watch Soa's eyes kind of get wide when I talked about, you've got to look beyond the glyphs. You've got to look beyond the hieroglyphs and look at the quality of the cut to give it any credibility, because the builders, the manufacturers of these items did not create those primitive marks. They did not create the primitive marks contemporaneous with the creation of the artifact. So really, they do not explain the artifact. And in fact, they could be very misleading. These are some of the boxes on the inside. See the size of those lids? But now we begin to look at the precision. That is a toolmaker square. It has a 14-inch blade, and it was calibrated on a Jones & Lamson comparator. It's within 50 millionths of an inch. And you can see you have a perfect square on the inside of this box. And just looking at the reflection in the granite, you can see the polish. There are no aberrations. The reflection is perfect. The surfaces are perfectly flat, perfectly smooth. But what do you have to do in order to create this condition? And we have the same condition on the opposite wall. So we've got this wall here, and then directly opposite, we have this inside wall. The same condition. What that means is that this surface and this surface, directly opposite, have to be perfectly parallel with each other, without any deviation whatsoever. You know how hard that is to do? This is not drywalling. I'm telling you. So we move beyond what was used to cut these artifacts. We have to ask the question, what were they using to actually check them? Because you couldn't have somebody creating this surface and not giving any mind to this surface, or giving any mind to the top surface that this huge lid sits on. Everything has to be taken into consideration. Everything has to be coordinated and created with precision, using precision instruments. That's the only way that you can do it. And those instruments don't exist. So when you ask the question, where's the machines? I don't know where the machines are. Did they exist? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no other way that they could have created these artifacts. And, well, I haven't got much time left. We can talk about constraint management. When we talk about how long it takes to cut an obelisk, I did a study. The unfinished obelisk, Hatshepsut's obelisk, was supposed to have been quarried, cut, shipped, erected, in position in a 7-month period of time. So I did a constraint analysis on how long it would take to do that. And basically, it comes to about 15.7 years and 34 years, 34.29 years. And that's only assuming that you've got like a 9-foot depth that you're going to. We saw shafts there that were 25 feet deep, 50 feet deep. They were plowing through that granite like it was butter. There was not a problem to quarry that granite. But with the tools that the ancient Egyptians are given credit for, such as the work of Dennis Starks using dolerite pounders, the material removal rate that they actually publish in refereed journals has actually created this number right here. That is their material removal rate, not mine. For 50 years.
You're talking here with machining or with dolerite powders?
Okay, these numbers are using Egyptologists' numbers. They're the results of their archaeological experiments using dolerite pounders. Right, yeah. And I communicated with the principal proponent of these methods, and he told me what his material removal rate was. He had published some of his material removal. On the roughing, he said it's about 35 cubic centimeters an hour. On the chiseling, it's about 5 cubic centimeters an hour. So they're not going very fast. And basically, the constraint analysis is that you can you have to look at the bottleneck, what takes the longest time, or where your resources reach a constraint. And basically, the constraint is how long it takes one person to cut a shaft or a patch down a certain level. Just one person. And what the deepest part is, and that one person doing it, because there's only one person that can be in that groove at one time, pounding away on the granite. Only one person at a time can be actually there. So that is your constraint. And how much material he can remove during a day. And that's basically it. It's cut and dried. There's no debating it. 50 years. And that's the Egyptologist perspective. It didn't really create a problem for them because they were able to do it in 7 months. But they would have to have been using different methods to do that. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to close on that. We have a couple of other slides here. This is the infamous Petrie core that shows evidence of ultrasonic drilling, where the groove wraps around the core, shows that the drills into the granite at a rate of 125 thousandths per revolution of the drill, 1/8 of an inch per revolution, which is an impossible feed rate. And you can see it's a spiral groove. They're not just scratches. And we looked at some other artifacts in the Petrie Museum, some evidence of lathe turning. This is a kind of an interesting object here. And then of course, the Denderer artifact or relief, which actually perfectly resemble a Crookes tube, which Sir William Crookes invented, and they discovered X-rays by using it. It's a cathode ray tube. And I believe I am done. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions. I've got some, and shortly too, we'll have some more d'oeuvres and stuff like that. Let's start with.
So Christopher, I've been called to Egypt several times.
You've been called?
I have been called to Egypt several times.
Yeah.
Did you go?
I went. Underneath that pyramid is a room way below, that has all of the records and why it was built. It's a communication instrument. And so I've been told a lot of things about it, and I thought I understood going to Egypt, but I'm going to have to go back.
Well, I'm going to have to go with you. You could show me that room, because
it's much below, and this being who's not on the planet, never has been, and he says that all of the records of how and why this was built is down in his chamber. Now, about 10 years ago, there were a couple of young men, who said they had drilled through down that channel. But I know they didn't, because I know what some of the records are, because I've been told. And this is big, it's not on the planet. And so I'm an attorney, and I see that we've got to go back and get that opened up and get the records out, because the world needs to know what it's supposed to be doing.
The Hall of Records has been a fascinating subject for many people. Personally, I believe that the Hall of Records is available for people to see. It's just a matter of interpreting it. Is there more to be discovered underground? Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that there is. Whether there are written records that describe everything in detail, I don't know. But it's fascinating.
It's before rain, there's probably not written records.
It may not be an English language.
Yeah. Right. Yes, sir.
If power is produced by the pyramid, do you know how it was, what the purpose of it was, why was it, how was it used, or how was it transmitted, or?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, when we talk about our civilization today, we take many different forms of energy and ultimately convert it to the kind of energy that we can use. And we have devices that we actually power with this energy. Similarly, I would say that was the case in the past, that they were able to, for one thing, the microwave energy that emitted from the King's Chamber could have been used to, it could have been converted to different frequencies, and it could have been transmitted to different points on the planet. I mean, if we're talking, Tesla technology, where you have the wireless transmission of energy. But the real question is, and this is, I perfectly understand, people want to see the artifacts that this energy was used to drive, if you will. And I can only refer back to the cataclysm that we talked about earlier, and what would happen with our civilization should we have a cataclysm of that proportion visited upon us, that we are so vulnerable because we're specialized. And as I was talking to one gentleman this morning, that you just take out one section of our society, say in extraction technologies, mining, what would happen? It would I'll just give you an example. We create products for jet engines and stationary gas turbines. Okay, we use nickel cobalt alloys, very sophisticated alloys. If extraction technologies were lost, if the mining and the smelting technologies were lost, and we couldn't get our materials, then you would have a chain reaction all the way down the line. The planes won't be able to fly, the power plants won't be able to, the turbines won't be able to spin. And a cataclysm too could actually scour great portions of the land. If you had tsunamis coming, because depending on where a comet would hit and what kind of changes happened at that time, it could be tremendous.
You suggest, as like on the cover there, that it's sending a maser and it's clearly going up in the sky. So you had also your last illustration in the book was like this.
Yeah.
Satellite. I mean,
Oh, that was.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, that was just a, yeah.
Well, what do you do with this thing? How you turn it on?
That was just a fun little doodle, I just put threw that in there to tweak the noses of Egyptologists because it drives them crazy. But
you can show people that one.
One other thing, in the Grand Hall.
Yeah, the Grand Gallery.
What?
The Grand Gallery.
Grand Gallery, sorry. You call a resonating chamber?
Yeah, the Resonator Hall.
Resonating hall. I believe at one end of it, there's actually like a plug that they call that's actually. Isn't there a plug at one end of the hall of the chamber?
Yeah, the plug of the
Ascending passageway.
Yeah. There are plugs down the ascending passageway. Yeah, granite plugs.
But isn't there a plug that could actually have been moved up and down the Grand
No.
Gallery?
When they originally poured into it, I thought there was some kind of plug there.
No, it's the
No.
ascending passageway.
It's there, but it can't be moved. That plug.
No,
It's
there- no.
there, but, yeah, it's an idea that it could be moved, but
My theory is this, that plug was movable, and that you could, by moving that, you're changing the size of the resonant chamber.
like a trombone. Or
Therefore,
something.
you can actually adjust.
Oh, I see. I see what you're driving at. Yeah. Well, I mean, that is one idea. Personally, I don't agree with that because I looked at the pyramid in this way, and this is just my idea. Ultimately, any idea it has to be tested. So I'm not saying this from a position of authority or anything like that. It's just my idea, and from a practical perspective, that when they built the pyramid and they put all the equipment together and they perfected their technology, everything was closed up. Okay? And so there was no access to the inside of the pyramid. And when you have moving parts in any machine, they require maintenance, for the most part. They have to require maintenance. So basically what you had was a solid state, in my opinion, and the way this hypothesis works, you had a solid state piece of equipment, and the only movement were discrete movements, such as the vibration and the sound, That was the only
Fluid
movement.
into the chamber.
Yeah, when you have mechanical members moving together, then you've got friction to overcome. Then you've got other considerations that you have to make. Yes, sir. I think there was one in the back there.
Yeah, have you considered making a miniature working model of your theory to see exactly what it does?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you should ask that. Even a miniature working model, would take resources that I don't have. But I can share with you now that there is currently interest in creating such models and actually proving out the technologies in different ways. The seismic attenuation or mitigation part of it, the coupled oscillator part of it. And this interest is not just a backyard hobbyist. It's a major corporation, a major organization. Yes, sir.
Two things. When you're talking about the cataclysm, or you're talking about the crustal displacement in 9600 BC or the 7 cometary impacts in 7460, and do you know the difference between
I don't know the difference between the two, but I would say that, yeah.
I can give you references on them. And then
Can you give me references on them? Because there's a young lady back there, Kathy Caston, who sent me an email, and she's been berating me all weekend because I haven't really published in Atlantis Rising this smoking gun that she sent to me. But I would like to get that information.
that subject. Second thing is, why did you choose the angles on the pyramid which are inaccurate on the front of your book?
I'm sorry?
On the front of your book,
Yeah?
why did you choose those particular angles? It's not the angles of the pyramid.
These angles? Yeah. Well, actually, this is what they call an artist rendition.
I understand that, but you seem to be a scientist, so why did you allow it to happen? I
well, okay. Yeah. Okay, what you're looking at here is the rotated pyramid. So the angles are not going to be 51 degrees, 52 minutes.
it's possible to draw it three-dimensionally with the correct angle.
Yeah.
And I know that people in their traditions,
Why didn't they do that? That seems to me to kind of be
Well,
a disservice.
They're not as precise as you are.
No, and I could share with you some of the conversations that was going on between me and the publisher at the time this was taking place. But it's pointless to do so. I mean, it exists. They wanted that cover. They put it on their book. They invested the money in it, and basically, the reality of the publishing business is that when it comes to marketing and when it comes to cover design, the author really doesn't know what he's talking about.
Unless you publish with Adventures Unlimited, where you
With
have
Adventures
control.
Unlimited. But this was with Bear and Company, and Inner Traditions, I think, will be a little more amenable to input. And I did have input on that, but it's very difficult to convey to an artist technical terms,
Just to relate a confirmation for you, I went to Egypt in 1975 with Joe Jockman before your time, and they played Paul Horns in the Great Pyramid, and there was a chap there who was really lovely, our guide, about 45 years old, and he immediately said, it was being played actually at dinner time, and he said, this is the music that I hear when I go to the Great Pyramid. And so he confirmed Paul Horn's music, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
what do you have to say about the notions that first of all, I think it's absolutely incorrect to perpetuate the naming of a king's chamber. But what do you think about
I'm sorry,
to call it a king's chamber? There was never anybody built in it.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
buried in it. So to call it a king or a queen's chamber is idiocy, in my opinion. What do you think about the notion that the coffer was not originally positioned in the position it is now?
That's correct.
actually, the way I draw it in my book, I draw it in a different position.
And why do you do that?
I actually speculated that it was a crystal amplifier for the microwaves, and I put it between the shafts.
Actually, if I can interject, when Petrie investigated in the Great Pyramid in 1888, he actually found that the coffer is not in its original position, that it had been moved, and it probably was in between the shafts,
Right.
which fits more into Chris's theory. So it has been moved.
And do you know why they say that it was in a different position?
It's more works it as a
Well,
resonator.
actually, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they moved it, or even if I am correct that it was between the shafts.
If you give me your email address, I'll send you a really interesting essay on that.
Okay, good.
Possible previous position and the function of that position.
What was the position? Could you share that with us?
Now you have to see it in the essays.
Okay. All right, good.
Oh, website information again? Your website or?
Oh, yeah, www.gizapower.com. Yes, ma'am.
I come from the island of Guam, largest of America's islands, and we have what they call the Laddie Stone. They're huge.
Yeah.
The belief is that they were built by giants. There's a lot of different stories, but the Chamorros, the indigenous people, Laddie stones are always lined up in parallels of 6 rows or 9, 6 to 9 per row. And a lot of people believe portals, electromagnetic fields, and that they were communication beams. But the belief of the natives is that everything was done with the mind. And I'm just curious. You know, you're saying that you believe some of these things were done with machines, and as far as, I don't know about the cutting them, but the movement, moving them, islanders, at least in the Micronesia region, if you talk to any of them, if they're willing to share that information with you, will tell you that the ancients did everything with the mind. So I was just curious what you.
I mean, I hear speculation on that. I don't believe it. Because I think we're working in.
Because what I find strange is that there's always talk about the pyramids and Stonehenge and rock formation, but no one ever talks about the Laddie stones, and they're only
Indigenous to the Marianas Islands, and we're talking huge.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they should be right up there with rock formations of Stonehenge. And it's very curious how there's a certain way that they're always built. They're always lined up like a runway. And they've been associated with electromagnetic fields and communications, and yet no one, I've been to different conferences and nobody ever talks about it. It's just kind of curious.
Do you have any photographs of them you could bring tomorrow?
The exact shape, the best comparison is the chalice of Jesus Christ.
What does that mean?
That it's like a cup sitting on a base stem. Just exact same shape, only huge. I mean, how can, why does that not, I don't know, for me, why does that not,
the chalice of Jesus Christ.
well, I
It's
mean,
not
that's
something I know
that's the only way I
a
can
great deal
describe
about.
it.
There's no
I mean, that's the
such thing.
closest thing in terms of what people here would associate it with, because I don't know how to describe it in scientific.
Yeah, I know.
It's a limestone, but I'm just
Do you
saying
have a
that's what it
photograph that
looks
you
like.
could bring tomorrow so we can see it?
Actually, David, I think, has it in his lost civilization of Mu, the lost city of Boomerang. Laddie stones are in there.
it's on the table.
All right.
Sure.
Any other questions for me? I mean, on that point, I would like to make one comment, and that is the the one-term Deus ex machina, where the hand of God. Humanity has always looked at nature and without any understanding of science, have credited the hand of God with creation, and I think a lot of that happens when we become so astounded when we are faced with something that we can't explain with our current technology, our understanding of nature.
Would you say that the mind, though, is far superior to any machine? I mean,
Oh, absolutely, I would say it's much better, yeah. But our job is to work in the material world and use our mind to actually work with material things. When it comes to speculation, that the mind was actually materialized these things, I would have to see the evidence. I'd have to. I guess I haven't gone that far over to my right brain. I'm still too far in my left brain to really accept that.
That's why they don't talk about Laddie
And maybe that's, no, I'd love to talk about it. I mean, because, you know, you've got so many other places. You've got the unfinished obelisk. I mean, they were throwing around 1,200-ton rocks in ancient times. And then we've got this fella down in Florida, this Ed Lee Scalnan, who weighs about less than 100 pounds, and he's moving a 30-ton block.
What's curious is they talk about it, but not limestone. I mean, very
That's because we don't know about it. I mean, publish an article on it. Get some photographs out for us. That'd be great.
I'll show you.
Yeah, that'd be fabulous. It's not well known.
I wondered if you could speculate on how the Giza power plant series you have tie in with ley lines and that so-called mapping of the Earth's energies that John Michel wrote about.
Yeah.